This is Ed Rogers, and I'm here to show you how it's all connected. The mess of seemingly disconnected things that are impacting our world. Things like the rise of ISIS, increasing worldwide violence, the crisis at our southern border, the demise of traditional morality, and our fragile economy. I'm talking about things we never would have thought possible just a few decades ago. Things that have caused a lot of us to reevaluate much of what we used to take for granted and to investigate things many people had dismissed or ignored. Things like what the Bible has to say about the last days. While all these things I just mentioned seem like a chaotic mess of chance and bad luck, the truth is that they and a host of other bizarre things we're experiencing are all connected. And when we look at the big picture, we see a common thread running through them all. Fortunately, at the end of that thread is hope. Yes, there really is hope. But that doesn't mean things aren't going to get ugly, because I'm afraid they are. We don't know how soon or just how ugly. But unless something drastic happens to change course, we're headed for some interesting times. I'm a big picture guy. That's just the way the Lord wired me. I try not to get so hung up on the details that I miss the bigger picture. What's really going on? I see the world like an iceberg. Most of the news analysts look only at the tip, the part they can see. They comment on what they see going on, explaining why it's good or bad. I look at the part below the waterline, the much larger part, the part that can sink a ship. My inclination is to discover why these things are happening, so we can better understand what we're really up against. My goal is to make sense out of the chaos that seems to have taken over our world. I'll do my best to avoid conspiracy theories and stick to the facts, the evidence, and logical conclusions. Although I do have to admit that in many cases the evidence suggests some really nasty and almost unbelievable stuff is going on right under our noses and around the world, especially in Washington and at the UN. I've spent considerable time developing sources around the world, especially in the Middle East. Sources who keep me updated on what's going on, both in plain sight and behind the curtain, especially regarding politics and religion. Some of my presentations will be purely political. Some will be presenting a biblical point of view, as I understand it, on certain issues. Many of my broadcasts will be to help my viewers understand why we should care about what's going on in Israel. Others will help you to understand ISIS, the Muslim Brotherhood, and Islam in general, so you can intelligently confront its claims of being a religion of peace. In my upcoming programs, I'll do my best to discuss issues that affect us all. Issues that threaten to undo us as a nation unless we realize what's happening to us, what we must do in response. Here are some of the topics I'll be discussing over the next few months. What is Pope Francis's real agenda? How close are we to a one-world government? How should Christians prepare for persecution? What's the immigration issue really all about? Why is America so politically divided, and what myths do people believe about Islam? As I stated previously, my overall purpose is to show that these are not separate and disjointed issues. Deep down, we all want to make sense out of the chaos that's occurring around us. We don't want to think that the world is out of control and we're just helpless victims. We really want stability and purpose. We want to know that someone cares about us and is working on our behalf. This is exactly what I will attempt to show, because all the things that we desire are, in fact, true. Let me give you an example of something newsworthy that will affect us all in a profound way in the very near future. Something that isn't at all as it appears, but can be understood by taking a giant step back and looking at the big picture. Think about the deal that the Obama administration just negotiated with Iran. First of all, we need to remember that we tend to judge and examine everything we see according to our own standards and values. This is especially dangerous in politics, and even more so with our current administration. Add Islam to the mix, and it's time for a real paradigm shift. We have to look at it from a totally different point of view than we're used to if we ever want to get to the truth. Let's take a brief look at Iran, a Shiite Muslim country that has openly expressed its hatred for America. Check out what Proverbs 26 has to say about hatred. He who hates disguises it with his lips, but he lays up deceit in his heart. When he speaks graciously, do not believe him, for there are 7 abominations in his heart. This brings us to the Islamic doctrine of taqiyya as it relates to the Iran deal. A Shiite encyclopedia describes taqiyya as concealing or disguising one's beliefs, convictions, ideas, feelings, opinions, and or strategies at a time of imminent danger, whether now or later in time, to save oneself from physical and or mental injury. What might constitute mental injury? Most often it is interpreted as perceived harm to one's reputation as a representative of Islam. In other words, taqiyya is essentially justified lying to cover your true intentions in just about every situation, especially when you're at the bargaining table with your enemy. Then there's the hudna, which is an Arabic term for a truce meant to produce a period of calm with an enemy in order to gain concessions, regroup, rearm, and reattack at the appropriate time. Yasser Arafat relied on the term when he spoke about his commitment to the Oslo Peace Accords back in '93 at a Johannesburg mosque a month after the signing. Not realizing that he was being taped, he boasted that the accords were merely a way to facilitate his jihad against Israel. When confronted regarding the statement, he resorted to the traditional fallback. He explained that he was merely using the term jihad as a struggle against inner negative forces. For the record, the only place that definition of jihad is believed is here in the West. Arafat also made frequent references to the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, calling it a model for his own brand of diplomacy. The treaty was made during the early days of Muhammad's regional power grab between the Prophet, along with his outmanned band of Muslims, and the Quraysh, the tribe that guarded the holy city of Mecca. Having been banished from Mecca to Medina, Muhammad and his followers were determined to join other Arabs in making the yearly pilgrimage to the pagan shrine known as the Kaaba, which means the square building or the cube. One day Muhammad received a revelation from Allah. He was to take heart. They would make the pilgrimage. When they had made the 200-mile trip south and were attempting to sneak into the city by the spring of Hudaybiyah, the men of Quraysh caught them, kept them out of the city, and shamed Muhammad in front of his men. They did, however, offer Muhammad and his men a rather sweet deal that became known as the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. Both parties agreed not to attack each other for a period of 10 years. Despite the benefits for the smaller and weaker group of Muslims, the agreement brought humiliation and shame. They were also disillusioned because their fearless leader had rolled over and agreed to the treaty. He had also prophesied falsely regarding their pilgrimage. Muhammad's response was that he had never said that they would make the pilgrimage that year. He meant some year. He went on to declare that they had actually won a great victory. We've seen this reenacted over and over in the clashes between some Muslim faction or nation and Israel. Despite the defeat, no matter how sound, they still declare victory. Oh, and by the way, 2 years after signing the treaty, Muhammad broke it by attacking and conquering the city of Mecca. So much for the treaty. With that background, do you really think the leaders of Iran have any intention of keeping any part of this deal? Before the ink was dry, they had already broken 2 key provisions. Yet Secretary Kerry and Barack Obama insist that this deal keeps Iran from ever developing a nuclear weapon. Taking a big picture approach allows us to see what the past tells us about the present. For the past 15 years, I've been researching and writing about the roles that Israel, Islam, and Christianity will likely play in the last days. With all the signs indicating that things are about to get dicey, we need to know what's really going on, how we should respond, and how we should prepare. And lastly, considering the nature of the things we'll be discussing, I'll always end by lightening things up a bit. You see, on a fairly regular basis, some rather strange things either show up in my inbox, usually from my friend Phil in Ohio, or show up in my mind, such as the realization that if Abe Lincoln had married Anna Barton instead of Mary Todd, they would have been known throughout history as Abe and Anna. I'm just saying, and now you know. I invite you to check out my website at edrogers.net. That's Rogers with a D, where you get a feel for who I am and what I'm offering. You'll also see my books and my blogs. Until our next program, this is Ed Rogers, showing you how. It's all connected.